May 24, 1925, Toledo, Ohio, Lucas County. It was just before midnight on Sunday when Emma Hatfield passed the alley that divided her block on the city's West End. The 48-year-old woman didn't live far from her sister Anna, and she was comfortable enough walking along Ewing Street between Palmwood and Fernwood Avenues in the residential neighborhood. Suddenly, out of the darkness, a figure leaped at her, a large metal object raised over his head. He dragged her into the alley and beat her viciously, leaving her so bloody that when she was found, witnesses would swear it looked as if she had been attacked by an axe. As a final insult, the killer ripped her clothes until she was almost nude. Emma was conscious long enough to tell police the assailant wasn't her husband, which was fortunate for him since the couple was estranged. But she could say little else. Over the next 4 months, 2 surgeries were attempted to repair her splintered skull. But on September the 9th, she succumbed to her injuries on the eve of a third operation. What nobody knew at the time was that a 2-year reign of terror had begun, and the Toledo Clubber had claimed his first victim. The clubber would stir a unique level of hysteria in this city of 250,000 souls. Survivors of his brutal attacks reported how he laughed, a maniacal cry that sounded like it came from hell itself. And he often painted his face red, as if he saw himself as some kind of warrior on a mission. Newsmen tried out the nickname Jack the Clubber. It had been 37 years since Jack the Ripper had terrorized London, so some comparisons were made early on. And like the Ripper, the Clubber would end with a semi-official death toll of 5, though many more victims would live through a night that haunted them for a lifetime. Unlike the Ripper, the Clubber didn't attack prostitutes in the most impoverished part of the city. He randomly chose women he found outdoors on the city's fashionable west side. And he didn't use a knife. His weapon was whatever blunt object was handy: a brick, a bottle, an iron rod, an automobile crank. The reference to Jack was eventually dropped, and history has come to call this elusive killer the Toledo Clubber. Nobody knew this when Emma Hatfield was found in a pool of blood that spring in 1925. They didn't even put it together when the Clubber killed victim number 2. It was August the 21st. Emma Hatfield was still fighting for her life in the hospital when Lydia Baumgartner was found dead between 2 houses in the 800 block of Dorr Street, less than 2 blocks from where Emma had been attacked. Lydia was 33 and the mother of 2. Like Emma, her skull had been crushed. Unlike Emma, she didn't live long enough to absolve her husband. Lydia's sister, Marie, said the couple had been fighting the night before. Lydia's husband stormed out. She went after him. He returned. She did not. And so her husband was promptly taken into custody before anyone had time to tie Lydia's assault to Emma's. He wouldn't be in there for long, because the Clubber struck a third time, and Toledo started to realize they had a predator on the loose. It was September the 21st, exactly 1 month after Lydia Baumgartner was killed, and just a few days after Emma Hatfield died from her injuries. 50-year-old Beth Hall left her home on Putnam Avenue to mail a letter. A block from home, the attack came out of nowhere, a man leaping at her, swinging a club at her head. She felt the first blow, but had the presence of mind to scream and hold up her arms to ward off the second blow. Perhaps it was her scream, but something frightened the Clubber, and he fled. Beth was badly wounded, but survived. She became the first witness able to describe her assailant and that maniacal laugh. The residents of Toledo, starting to realize they had a monster in their midst, banded together to try and protect their women. Boy Scouts in pairs were assigned to escort female workers to their jobs and back home. The American Legion signed up hundreds of ex servicemen to serve as vigilantes. Female police officers from New York came into town to help, offering to dress up as housewives and walk the streets, trying to lure the clubber out. They wore hats lined with steel to protect them from that first blow. And 150 special railroad detectives joined the city's police force in their nightly patrol. There were fewer women to protect because many were refusing to leave their homes for anything after dark. But that wasn't an easy choice for some. Winter had come. Darkness fell in the afternoon. Many women had responsibilities, jobs, errands to run. And with the city still filled with plenty of prey, the Toledo Clubber was about to go on a week-long spree. On November the 16th, Wilma Headley, a 24-year-old telephone operator, left work and was walking along 20th Street near Monroe when a man came out from behind a large tree, swinging at her. The powerful blow missed her head but struck her shoulder, sending her to the ground. More blows fell, but a car turned the corner and the headlights scared him away. She survived and repeated the observation of that terrible laugh and a face painted red. 2 nights later, on November the 18th, Frida Draheim was walking a short distance from her sister's house onto Tecumseh Street when a shadow fell on her. The man came from behind a tree and got off 2 quick blows, fracturing her skull. But Frida also would get lucky. A 17-year-old neighbor named Raymond Gordon was about 200 feet away when he saw the attack and ran to her aid. The clubber peeled off and fled, laughter in his wake. Authorities were able to respond so quickly, 100 police officers had cordoned off the district within minutes. And still, they couldn't find him. 2 nights after that, at 10 in the evening, 20-year-old Pauline Winover was sitting in a car at the curb on Adams Street, waiting for her companion to come out of a store. The clubber ran to the passenger door and yanked it open and tugged at Pauline, trying to pull her out. He swung something at her, but the object hit the top of the sedan. The commotion was enough to draw the attention of witnesses, who chased him away. Pauline told authorities her assailant had red rings painted around his eyes. Police were publicly frustrated at the number of reports coming in and were convinced many of them were not the handiwork of the clubber. On November the 21st, a woman named Viola Chatham was attacked in a restaurant in the Union train station. The assailant had torn much of her clothing from her before 2 men came to the rescue and drove the assailant away. That same night, Lorraine Braun, just 18 years old, was found unconscious laying on the street. She was reportedly on her way home from a football game. But neither woman had been hit on the head, and Police Chief Jennings didn't think they were the work of the clubber. Each woman who survived an attack added more details to the clubber's appearance. They described him as wild-looking, beast-like, with superhuman strength. They said he was tall and shaggy, with bloodshot, fiery eyes. He was said to have a sharply hooked nose and prominent, irregular upper teeth that protruded over his lower lip. A newspaper artist tried his hand at a composite sketch and published a drawing that looked like something straight out of a horror movie. The killer may have also revealed something of a motive. A couple of his victims had heard him muttering something about all women being fickle as he struck them, leaving police to wonder if he was brooding over some unhappy love affair. On November the 29th, the clubber's next victim was Cora Batchelor, a telephone company employee who lived on Colfax Street. She was walking at the edge of what now everyone was calling the Clubber District. The 33-year-old was startled to see a man leap into view and had enough time to plead for her life. I begged him not to hit me, she told police, but he only responded with a laugh. It was the most awful thing I ever heard. It didn't sound human. Then he struck. Cora's thick hair and heavy felt hat saved her. That very night, police made an arrest, and Toledo breathed a collective sigh of relief. Local hunters, Stanley Novak and Charles Posany, found a man in the woods carrying a large hammer that appeared to have blood on it. When the hunters spotted him, the man whirled around and ran. The hunters notified the sheriff, and deputies quickly found the subject of their concern. The man was 40-year-old Robert August Molnar. He was 40 years old, wore a gray slouch hat, a dirty gray overcoat, and 3 pairs of trousers. He carried a bag filled with old newspapers, dried fruits, and nuts. And during interrogation, he was happy to confess, "Yes, I'm the man you want. I clubbed all the women," he said. Police took a photo of the man and took it to the home of Cora Batchelor, who reportedly became so hysterical when she saw his picture she couldn't respond to their questions for 2 hours. When she regained composure, she said she was almost positive it was the man who attacked her. But other things weren't adding up. No other victims could identify the man in that photo. And detectives were disappointed when August kept insisting he'd used an axe in all of his attacks. None of the women had been attacked with an axe, as far as they could tell. Lastly, when the blood on his hammer turned out to be chicken blood, Molnar was declared insane, committed to Toledo State Hospital, and authorities went back to work looking for their murderer. The fact that Molnar wasn't the Toledo Clubber was confirmed just after the new year, when the killer took a third life. On January the 19th, 1926, a resident found his neighbor dead in his backyard in the 300 block of Woodland Avenue. 44-year-old Mary Handley had been beaten, her head smashed by repeated blows. She also had been gagged by her own clothing. There was a trail of blood that led to the front yard where her hat was found. The coroner found it likely she had been attacked in the street and dragged to the spot where she died. By now, Toledo had many outside sources offering aid. The William J. Burns Detective Agency was called to town and remained for a time before acknowledging they were baffled. Reportedly, a retired agent of Scotland Yard was put to work on the case, but he also failed to solve it. Rewards offered from several sources reached thousands of dollars. And then, inexplicably, the attacks stopped, and Toledo fell into an uncomfortable peace. Did the killer die? Did he leave town? 8 months passed, and then October the 26th of 1926, Lily Dale Croy came from a prominent family and was a popular 26-year-old teacher at Gunkel School. She originally wanted to be a missionary, but abandoned that idea when her father died. She lived with her mother, Emma, and on Monday evenings she attended the University of Toledo for an American government class. It was just a 10-minute walk from her home. She made it to school, but when she hadn't returned by 9:30, her mother became alarmed. Relatives were called in to search for her. Police joined the hunt soon after. Shortly before 2 a.m., her half-brother, Julius Weist, found her body beneath a fire escape of Washington School. Her head was crushed and her clothes torn away from her body. Her rings were still on her fingers. Her watch was shoved halfway up her arm, and it was stopped at 10:10. An iron bar was found with her blood and matted hair. The coroner determined she had been struck in the head at least 10 times, but she had also been raped. That was a first, and not the MO of the clubber. Just 18 hours after Lily was murdered, while police were out looking for suspects and interviewing neighbors, they were diverted to yet another crime scene, just a few blocks away on 14th Street. This one, Mary Alden, a 47-year-old housewife. She had been beaten to death in the kitchen of her home, but also shot. She was discovered by her husband when he returned from his shift in a local factory. The murders of Lily and Mary were very different than the murders from the year before. Lily being raped, Mary being shot and in her home. But they had both been beaten in the head, and both had occurred in the same neighborhood as the others. Police weren't convinced these killings were related to the 1925 attacks, or even related to each other, but the neighborhood was shell-shocked. It's been nearly a century since Toledo's west side was rocked by such violence. Whether the murders were related or not, however, people keeping count credit the elusive clubber with 13 attacks, 5 deaths, and a face that should only live in nightmares.
Thank you for watching Ohio Mysteries. If you appreciate the effort, please hit the subscribe button down below if you haven't already. Ohio Mysteries also has a podcast with nearly 300 stories in our catalog. Find those on your favorite podcast app or visit ohiomysteries.com for the entire episode list.